Rabbi David Goldberg was organizing his study on a quiet Thursday afternoon when the volunteer coordinator knocked on his door. At 68 years old, he had grown accustomed to the rhythm of his solitary work, preparing sermons, counseling congregants, and maintaining the sacred spaces of Temple Beth Shalom. The synagogue had been his life for over 30 years, a sanctuary where he found purpose, even in his deepest moments of personal sorrow. Mrs. Patterson from the local children's services stood in his doorway with a small figure beside her. The child was perhaps 8 years old, with auburn hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and clothes that had clearly been selected from donated items. Her shoes were slightly too large, and her jacket bore the careful mending that spoke of institutional care. But her eyes, bright green and alert, held an intelligence that seemed far beyond her years. "Rabbi Goldberg, this is Sarah. She's part of our community service program for children in foster care. I was hoping she could help with some light cleaning and organizing today." The rabbi looked down at the small girl, who met his gaze without the shyness he typically expected from children her age. There was something old and knowing in her expression, as if she had seen more of life's difficulties than most adults. Sarah carried a small backpack and wore an expression of cautious optimism, the look of someone who had learned not to expect too much, but still hoped for kindness. The rabbi had always been comfortable with children, but something about this particular child struck him as different. She possessed a gravity that seemed unusual for someone so young. Yet her presence brought an unexpected warmth to his book-filled study. Mrs. Patterson explained that Sarah had been in the foster system for 3 years, and that community service helped the children develop skills while contributing to their neighborhoods. After Mrs. Patterson left, Rabbi Goldberg found himself alone with Sarah in his cluttered study. Books covered every available surface: religious texts, philosophical works, and years of accumulated papers that needed sorting. The afternoon sunlight filtered through tall windows, casting geometric patterns across the wooden floor. Sarah stood quietly, taking in her surroundings with the careful observation of someone accustomed to quickly assessing new environments. "Well, Sarah," the rabbi said gently, "I suppose we should start with these books. Many of them need to be reorganized, and some of these papers haven't been filed in months." He watched as she nodded seriously and immediately rolled up her sleeves, revealing thin arms that spoke of irregular meals and insufficient care. Despite her small stature, she approached the task with the methodical determination of someone much older. As they worked side by side, Rabbi Goldberg was struck by Sarah's careful handling of each book. She would examine the titles with genuine curiosity, asking questions about Hebrew letters and the meaning of unfamiliar words. Her questions revealed a sharp mind, hungry for knowledge and understanding. She seemed particularly drawn to books with illustrations, studying pictures of ancient Jerusalem and traditional ceremonies with fascination. "I've never been in a place like this before," she said quietly, running her small fingers along the spine of a leather-bound prayer book. "It feels peaceful." The rabbi smiled at her observation. "That's exactly what a synagogue should feel like. It's meant to be a place where people can find peace and answers to difficult questions." As they continued organizing, Sarah's natural efficiency became apparent. She developed a system for sorting papers and created neat piles that made the rabbi's work significantly easier. Her presence transformed the solitary task into something resembling companionship, though neither of them spoke much as they worked. Block 3. Unexpected questions. As the afternoon progressed, Sarah's questions became more profound and personal. While dusting a shelf of theological texts, she paused and looked up at Rabbi Goldberg with her penetrating green eyes. "Do you think God answers prayers even when the person praying doesn't get what they want?" The question caught the rabbi off guard. In 3 decades of ministry, he had addressed this fundamental theological challenge countless times. But hearing it from an 8-year-old orphan gave it new weight and urgency. He set down the book he was holding and considered his response carefully. "That's one of the hardest questions anyone can ask," he said honestly. "Sometimes I think the answer comes in ways we don't expect or recognize right away." Sarah nodded, as if this confirmed something she had already suspected. "I prayed every day for my mom to come back, but she never did. The social workers said she couldn't take care of me anymore because of her sickness. But I kept praying anyway." The simple honesty of her statement pierced through the rabbi's pastoral training and touched something raw in his own experience. He had spent years offering comfort to others facing loss and disappointment, but he rarely allowed himself to examine his own unresolved grief. "Sometimes," he said slowly, "prayers are answered by bringing us people who can help us carry the heavy things we can't lift alone." Sarah considered this thoughtfully as she continued her careful dusting. "Is that why you became a rabbi? To help people carry heavy things?" The question revealed an understanding of ministry that many adults never grasped. Rabbi Goldberg realized that this child possessed an intuitive wisdom about human nature and spiritual matters that was both remarkable and slightly unsettling. Her experiences had clearly forced her to grapple with existential questions at an age when most children were worried about playground politics and homework assignments. Block 4. A shared secret. During a break from cleaning, Sarah noticed a framed photograph on Rabbi Goldberg's desk that he had quickly turned face down when she entered the study. With the directness that only children possess, she asked about the hidden picture. The rabbi hesitated, his hand moving protectively toward the frame. For 22 years, he had kept this particular grief private, sharing it only with his late wife before her own passing 5 years earlier. "It's a picture of someone very important to me," he said carefully. "Someone I lost a long time ago." Sarah's expression softened with understanding. "Was it someone in your family?" Her question was asked with the gentle curiosity of someone who understood loss intimately. The rabbi found himself nodding, surprised by his willingness to acknowledge the photograph's significance to this young stranger. "My son." His name was Michael. He would have been 32 years old now. The words came out more easily than they had in years, perhaps because Sarah's own experience with loss created a safe space for sharing grief. She nodded solemnly, processing this information with the serious consideration she gave to everything. "How old was he when he went away?" she asked, using the euphemism children often employ when discussing death. "He was 10, Rabbi Goldberg replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "He had leukemia. We did everything the doctors suggested, but sometimes, even with all the prayers and medical care, people still leave us too soon." Sarah absorbed this information quietly, then surprised him by reaching over and gently turning the photograph upright. The image showed a boy with dark hair and his father's gentle eyes, frozen forever at age 10 in a hospital bed, but smiling bravely at the camera. "He looks like he was really loved," Sarah observed, with the simple wisdom that children sometimes possess. "The people who love us never really go away completely. They just love us from somewhere we can't see." Block 5. Unexpected wisdom. As they resumed their cleaning, Sarah's presence seemed to unlock something in Rabbi Goldberg that had been sealed away for decades. He found himself sharing memories of Michael that he had rarely spoken aloud, stories about his son's love of baseball, his questions about God and justice, his remarkable courage during his illness. Sarah listened with the focused attention of someone who understood that these stories were precious gifts being shared with her. In return, she began to share her own experiences of loss and resilience. She spoke about her mother's struggles with addiction, the series of foster homes that had never quite felt like family, and her own questions about why some children got to keep their parents while others did not. Her insights into human nature were startling in their depth and accuracy. I think sometimes grown-ups forget that kids can see when they're sad, she said, while organizing a stack of sermon notes. They try to hide it, but it just makes their sadness bigger and heavier. The observation struck Rabbi Goldberg with its truth. He had spent over 2 decades hiding his grief behind his role as a spiritual leader, believing that showing his own pain would diminish his ability to help others. But Sarah's simple statement revealed the flaw in this thinking. His hidden sorrow had indeed grown heavier over time, affecting his ministry in ways he had never acknowledged. As the afternoon continued, Sarah began to hum softly while she worked, unconsciously filling the study with a warmth that had been absent for years. Her voice was sweet and pure, carrying melodies that seemed to come from some deep well of natural joy, despite all her experiences of loss and disappointment. The rabbi found himself smiling genuinely for the first time in months, watching this small person transform his sterile workspace into something that felt almost like a home. Her enthusiasm for the work was infectious, and her careful attention to detail made every task feel important and meaningful. Block 6. A deeper connection. During their lunch break, Sarah made an observation that stopped Rabbi Goldberg in his tracks. While eating a simple sandwich Mrs. Patterson had packed for her, she looked around the study and said, "This room feels lonely, even with all these books for company. I think it misses having a family in it." Yet, the comment was delivered with the matter-of-fact honesty that children possess, but its accuracy was devastating. The rabbi realized that Sarah had identified something he had been unable to articulate about his own living and working spaces. Since his wife's death and his son's much earlier passing, he had gradually created an environment that was functional but devoid of the warmth that comes from shared life and love. "You're very perceptive," he said quietly. "It has been lonely. I suppose I got used to being alone and forgot that rooms need life in them to feel alive." Sarah nodded as if this was obvious. In the foster homes, you can always tell which families are just doing their job and which ones actually want kids around. The houses feel different. The air feels different. Her insight into the emotional atmosphere of living spaces revealed a sensitivity that had been sharpened by years of assessing whether new environments would be safe and welcoming. As they returned to their work, Sarah began to subtly rearrange items in ways that made the space feel more welcoming. She positioned chairs to encourage conversation, placed books at angles that invited browsing, and somehow managed to make the afternoon light seem warmer and more inviting. The rabbi watched her unconsciously creating a more home-like environment and realized that she possessed an intuitive understanding of what makes a space feel loved and lived in. Her changes were small but transformative, turning his solitary workplace into something that felt capable of hosting relationships and genuine human connection. The transformation was so subtle that he might not have noticed if he hadn't been paying close attention to her methods and motivations. Block 7. The Discovery. While organizing a closet filled with old files and forgotten items, Sarah discovered a box that had been pushed to the very back and covered with a dusty cloth. Inside, she found children's books, toys, and clothing that had clearly belonged to a young boy. The items had been carefully preserved but hidden away, as if saving them caused too much pain, but discarding them was unthinkable. Rabbi Goldberg froze when he saw what she had found. These were Michael's belongings, boxed up after his death, and stored away when the pain of seeing them became unbearable. For 22 years, they had remained untouched, neither displayed nor disposed of, trapped in the same emotional limbo that had characterized his own grief process. Sarah examined the items with reverence, understanding immediately their significance. She held up a worn baseball glove and looked at the rabbi with eyes full of compassion. "These belonged to your son, didn't they?" When he nodded, unable to speak, she continued gently, "They're beautiful things. He must have really loved this glove." Her response was so different from what he had expected. Instead of the awkward sympathy or uncomfortable avoidance that most adults displayed when confronted with evidence of his loss, Sarah treated Michael's belongings as treasures that deserved respect and attention. She examined each item carefully, asking gentle questions about Michael's interests and personality. "He liked baseball?" she asked, holding up a trophy for Most Improved Player. "And reading?" She indicated a collection of well-worn chapter books. Rabbi Goldberg found himself able to answer her questions, sharing stories about Michael's passion for the game and his love of adventure novels. For the first time in decades, he was able to speak about his son's life rather than just his death, focusing on the joy and personality that had made Michael special rather than the tragedy of his early passing. Block 8. Healing Through Memory. What happened next surprised Rabbi Goldberg completely. Instead of suggesting that the box be put away again, Sarah began to carefully arrange Michael's belongings around the study. She placed the baseball glove on a shelf where it could be seen and appreciated, positioned the books among the religious texts where they belonged, and found places for other treasured items that honored their significance without overwhelming the space. "Things that belong to people we love shouldn't be hidden away," she said, with the certainty of someone who had learned this lesson through hard experience. "They should be where we can see them and remember the happiness they brought." Her approach to memorializing Michael was completely different from the preservation through hiding that the rabbi had practiced for decades. Sarah understood instinctively that healthy grief involved integration rather than avoidance, celebration rather than suppression. As she worked, she asked more questions about Michael's personality, his dreams, and the daily moments that had made their relationship special. Rabbi Goldberg found himself laughing as he shared funny stories about his son's determined attempts to master a curveball and his elaborate plans for becoming a professional baseball player who also wrote adventure novels. The laughter felt foreign at first, as if he was betraying his grief by experiencing joy while discussing Michael. But Sarah's easy acceptance of both sadness and happiness in the same conversation showed him that mourning didn't require the elimination of positive memories. "He sounds like he was really funny," she observed, arranging Michael's books by height. "And smart. I bet he would have liked helping with this cleaning project too." The simple statement created a bridge between past and present that the rabbi had been unable to build on his own. For the first time, he could imagine Michael as part of his current life, rather than just a painful memory from his past. Block 9. A Child's Wisdom. As the day progressed, Sarah continued to demonstrate wisdom that seemed impossible for someone her age. While organizing Michael's books, she made an observation that cut straight to the heart of Rabbi Goldberg's long-held guilt and regret. "Sometimes grown-ups think they should have been able to fix things that weren't really their fault," she said, not looking up from her careful arrangement of the volumes. "But some things are just too big for people to fix, even parents and doctors." The statement was clearly directed at his own situation, though she delivered it with the indirect gentleness that allowed him to receive it without feeling exposed or analyzed. Rabbi Goldberg realized that his grief had been complicated for decades by his belief that he should have been able to save Michael through prayer, determination, or sheer force of will. "How did you learn to be so wise?" he asked, genuinely curious about the experiences that had shaped her understanding of loss and acceptance. Sarah shrugged, a gesture that was both childlike and ancient. "When you don't have control over big things that happen to you, you learn pretty fast what you can control and what you can't. Fighting the things you can't control just makes everything harder." Her insight into the nature of acceptance was more profound than many theological treatises he had read on the subject. She had learned through lived experience what he had struggled to understand through decades of study and reflection. As they continued working together, Sarah shared more of her own philosophy about surviving difficult circumstances. She spoke about the importance of finding small things to be grateful for each day, about the difference between being sad and being bitter, and about how helping other people often helped her feel less alone with her own problems. Her perspective on resilience was both practical and deeply spiritual, grounded in reality but sustained by hope. Rabbi Goldberg realized that this 8-year-old orphan was teaching him lessons about faith and healing that he had been unable to learn in 3 decades of ministry. Block 10. Unexpected Proposal. As their day of cleaning together drew to a close, Sarah made a suggestion that took Rabbi Goldberg completely by surprise. While packing up the supplies they had used, she looked around the transformed study and said, "This place feels happy now, like a room where a family lives. Maybe I could come back next week and help you with more organizing." The request was made casually, but Rabbi Goldberg could hear the hope and longing beneath her matter-of-fact tone. He realized that their day together had been as meaningful for her as it had been for him, providing her with the kind of purposeful activity and genuine appreciation that were probably rare in her institutional life. "I think that would be wonderful," he replied, watching her face light up with genuine joy. "There's always more work to be done here, and you've been the best helper I've ever had." Sarah's smile was radiant, transforming her serious little face into something that reminded him powerfully of childhood's capacity for pure happiness. They made plans for her to return the following Thursday, and Rabbi Goldberg found himself looking forward to the appointment with an anticipation he hadn't felt about anything in years. As Mrs. Patterson arrived to collect Sarah, the social worker commented on the dramatic change in both the study's appearance and the rabbi's demeanor. The room looked warmer and more welcoming, but more importantly, Rabbi Goldberg seemed lighter somehow, as if a burden he had been carrying for years had been shifted to a more manageable position. Sarah gathered her small backpack and prepared to leave, but before going, she did something that surprised everyone in the room. She approached Rabbi Goldberg and hugged him briefly but firmly, the kind of hug that children give when they want to offer comfort to an adult they care about. "Thank you for letting me help you," she whispered, "and for telling me about Michael. I think he would be proud of how you're taking care of his things now." Block 11. A New Beginning. In the weeks that followed, Thursday afternoons became the highlight of Rabbi Goldberg's week. Sarah's regular visits brought structure and purpose to his time that went far beyond the actual cleaning and organizing they accomplished together. She attacked each new project with enthusiasm and intelligence, but more importantly, she filled the synagogue with a kind of life and energy that had been missing for years. Their conversations deepened as they grew more comfortable with each other. Sarah shared stories about school, her foster family, and her dreams for the future, while Rabbi Goldberg found himself opening up about his own childhood, his calling to the ministry, and his continuing grief over the losses he had experienced. Their friendship was unusual but profound, bridging generations and circumstances in ways that enriched both their lives. Sarah's influence extended beyond their private conversations. She began attending Saturday services, sitting in the front row with an attention and seriousness that impressed the entire congregation. Her questions during religious education classes were thoughtful and challenging, forcing the rabbi to examine familiar concepts from new angles. Other congregants began to notice the positive changes in their spiritual leader's demeanor and preaching, though few understood the source of his renewed energy and focus. The rabbi arranged for Sarah to receive formal religious instruction, and she threw herself into learning Hebrew and Jewish traditions with the same intensity she brought to their cleaning projects. Her quick mind and genuine curiosity made her an ideal student. But more than that, her presence reminded the rabbi why he had originally been drawn to teaching and ministry. As the months passed, Rabbi Goldberg began to realize that Sarah was filling a void in his life that went beyond companionship. Her need for guidance and stability matched his need to nurture and protect, creating a relationship that benefited both of them in fundamental ways. He started thinking about permanence, about the possibility of providing her with the kind of stable home she had never known while giving himself the family connection he had lost. Block 12. Full Circle. 1 year after Sarah first walked into his study, Rabbi Goldberg stood before a family court judge with adoption papers in his hand. The process had been lengthy and complicated, requiring extensive background checks, home studies, and evaluations of his ability to provide for a child at his age. But Sarah's enthusiastic support for the arrangement and the clear evidence of their strong bond had ultimately convinced the authorities that this unusual pairing was in everyone's best interest. Sarah, now 9 years old and significantly taller than when they first met, stood beside him wearing a new dress and an expression of nervous excitement. They had talked extensively about what adoption would mean, and she had been clear that she wanted Rabbi Goldberg to become her legal father. The idea of having a permanent family, of belonging somewhere without the constant uncertainty of foster care, had appealed to her enormously. As the judge made the adoption official, Rabbi Goldberg felt a completeness he hadn't experienced since Michael's death 23 years earlier. Sarah's presence hadn't replaced his son or erased his grief, but she had shown him that his capacity for love and family hadn't died with Michael. She had taught him that healing didn't require forgetting, and that new relationships could honor past losses rather than betray them. The synagogue community celebrated their new family with enthusiasm, organizing a party that felt like both a homecoming and a new beginning. Sarah moved into the rabbi's house, where she immediately began making changes that transformed it from a lonely man's dwelling into a genuine home. She hung her artwork on the walls, filled the kitchen with the sounds of conversation and laughter, and brought friends over to study and play. The house that had been silent for years began to ring with the noise of active, happy life. In his study, Michael's belongings remained visible and honored, but they were now part of a living space rather than a shrine to the past. Sarah had learned about her adopted brother through stories and photographs, and she spoke about him naturally as part of their family history. She had solved Rabbi Goldberg's deepest pain not by erasing it, but by showing him how to carry it forward into a future filled with love, purpose, and hope.